All right, this week's Sedra is Parshas Vayechi. It talks about the death of Yaakov. Now, at the end of last week's Sedra, the end concludes with how the Jewish people settled in Egypt. Thus, Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the region of Goshen. They acquired property in it, and they were fruitful and multiplied greatly. So it talks of the Jewish people, in a sense, becoming residents in Egypt. And this next Sedra immediately starts, Vayechi Yaakov Beretz Mitzrayim Shvas Shana. Yaakov lived in Egypt 17 years, and then it tells us that he lived 147 years, his life, and ultimately he died. And Rashi is troubled because the general rule is between one Parsha and another, Parsha is like a paragraph, as contrasted with a Sedra. A Sedra is what we read on a particular Shabbos. But a Parsha is a paragraph. Some Sedros could have many paragraphs. Some Sedros could have one paragraph. But a Parsha is like a paragraph in the Torah. And the general rule is that between one Parsha and the other, between one paragraph of the Torah and a separate paragraph in the Torah, there is open space. Depending on the nature of the paragraph and depending on the opinion, there's a discussion how much open space there is. However, there clearly, between one paragraph and another, there is always open space. And Rashi is troubled because Rashi says, immediately after the last pasuk in last week's Sedra, that talks about the Jewish people having roots in Egypt, becoming residents of Egypt, becoming many in Egypt, acquiring land in Egypt, the Torah immediately, without having any empty space between them, begins the next paragraph about how long Yaakov lived and the death of Yaakov. Now, this question is very troubling. Who says it's two separate paragraphs? Maybe the fact that there is no space in between is indicative of the fact that the end of last week's Sedra and the beginning of this week's Sedra is part and parcel of the same paragraph. Okay, then the question would be, why is it that they created the Sedras in such a form that one Sedra should end in the middle of a paragraph and the other Sedra should begin in the middle of the paragraph? But that's not the question that Rashi raises. Rashi raises the question, Lama Parsha Stuma. Why is it that this paragraph, he assumes that the beginning of Parshas Vayechi is an altogether different paragraph? It's not part and parcel of the paragraph of the end of Parshas Vayigash. So the question is, why isn't there open space between the two paragraphs? Now, we could suggest if I could use the Hebrew word of chakira, we could suggest two possibilities. The fact that there is always open space, empty space, I should say, in the Torah between one paragraph and the other, is that what makes it a separate paragraph or no? There are other criteria. Perhaps we don't know what those criteria are. The Chachamim of the previous, well, I shouldn't say previous generations, but the Chachamim of the Medrash, which Rashi is based on, they were certainly aware of the rules. What makes one paragraph separate from the other paragraph? So in other words, the question is it the empty spaces that makes it a separate paragraph? Or no, it's not the empty spaces that makes it a separate paragraph. It's a separate paragraph because of the nature of the topic being discussed, or the way the Torah discusses it. But the halacha is that when we have two topics, and there is reason for them to be considered two separate paragraphs, you have to put space between them. And then the question arises, so why is it that there is no empty space here between these two paragraphs? So that in reality is Rashi's question. Rashi's question is, I know others suggest other explanations, that it's talking about the Sedra, but the Sedras, who formed the Sedros? The Sedros were formed by Ezra HaSofer, and which was long after the giving of the Torah. And Rashi is a Peirush, is a commentary on the Torah. If Ezra HaSofer would have asked if Rashi would have asked the question, and in where there would be some indication in Talmudic or Midrashic literature about Parshas Vayechi being a separate Sedra, we would understand. But Rashi is a commentary on the Chumash. He's coming to explain the Chumash as it was seen before the time of Ezra, as it was seen at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. So how is it that Rashi is so Rashi obviously felt that on the basis that the Chachamim felt that on the basis of the rules, the end of Parshas Vayigash was one paragraph, the end of Parshas Vayechi, the beginning of Parshas Vayechi is another paragraph, but nevertheless, there is no space in between them. It's like going from one word to the other. And Rashi gives an answer. It gives actually two answers. The Medrash gives three answers. But the first answer Rashi gives, that the Shenistabu Einehem B'libam Shel Yisrael, the eyes and the hearts of the Jewish people became closed from the pain or the trouble of the enslavement. Because to a certain degree, the enslavement began from the time Yaakov died. Now everybody is troubled because we know that the enslavement of the Jewish people in Egypt did not begin at that time. The enslavement of the Jewish people, as we see from Parsha Shemos, began when Yosef and his brothers, when all the brothers of Yosef had passed away. It seems from the Medrash that Levi was the last of the brothers of Yosef to pass away. And the enslavement of the Jews began to a certain degree, it seems, from the Medrash during the time of Levi, but really not till after the passing of Levi. So it's very difficult. What do you mean that the reason the Parshas are put together is to tell us that the hearts and the minds of the Jewish people, the eyes and the hearts or minds of the Jewish people were closed because of the pain, because of the trouble of the enslavement. The enslavement did not yet begin at that point. And we could suggest that the idea contained is true. The enslavement didn't begin. But the attitude that brought about the enslavement began. The discrimination began. It didn't happen overnight. One day they were the leaders of Egypt, and the next day they are slaves in Egypt. And when it comes, and the Jews might have felt the pain. And we know when people feel pain, there is a tendency to close their eyes, a psychological tendency to close their eyes. It's a sign of I can't bear it. So that would explain the idea of closing the eyes. But what does Rashi mean when he says the eyes of the Jews and the hearts of the Jews were closed because of the pain of the enslavement? What does that mean? All right, and then Rashi mentions another explanation. And the second explanation is that Yaakov, Bikesh Legalos Esikates, Yaakov, before he died, wanted to reveal to them about the coming of Mashiach, the coming of the redemption. B'nistam mimenu, and it became covered up from him. And the question is, how do we see, and this applies to the first explanation also, how do we see from the fact that there is no space between the end of Parshas Vayigash, of the Sedra Vayigash, and the Sedra and the beginning of the Sedra Vayechi, that it was removed from him. It's true. The word sosum means that it was closed. So you could say the because there's no space, so the words to a certain degree are closed, and it was closed to him. The door of realizing the future of the redemption of the Jewish people became close to him to prevent him from knowing and to revealing when it is. I don't know. I have some trouble with that. Now, what I think, and I'm going to discuss the first answer first, the second answer, the second explanation first, and then the first answer second. The Medrash says, Beis Halevi discusses it at length, and I have mentioned this many times, that as a result of the Egel Hazav, as a result of the golden calf, the Jewish people got a Torah Shabbal Peh, got an oral tradition. The simple reading of the pasuk of the Medrash is that if the Jewish people hadn't sinned with the golden calf, so there wouldn't have been an oral tradition. We would have been required to observe the Torah as it's written. It's difficult to comprehend this idea. In other words, the implication being that when the Torah says, Ayin Tachas Ayin, that if somebody puts out the eye of his friend, his eye is also removed. That's the simple reading of the Torah. An eye for an eye. That if the Jewish people did not make a golden calf, they would not have been given the halacha that the Torah is not to be taken literally. Our sages tell us that when the Torah says an eye for an eye, it doesn't mean literally an eye for an eye. It means that you have to pay what the eye is considered worth on the basis of damages. First of all, I would have trouble with that in itself. But what does that have to do with the Ego Hazav? And the Beis Halevi suggests that the explanation is that a large, if not for the sin of the Ego Hazav, if not for the sin of the golden calf, large parts of the Torah Shabbal Peh, large parts of the oral tradition would have actually been written in to the Torah Shabbat, would have been written in the written Torah. But because of the Ego Hazav, because of the sin that the Jewish people committed when they made the Ego Hazav, when they made the golden calf, because of that, large parts of the Torah that should have been written in, or that would have been written in the Torah scroll, was given over orally. What's the explanation for it? But the explanation is very simple. What did the Egel Hazav demonstrate? What did the golden calf demonstrate? The golden calf demonstrated the need for a Rebbe. The Jewish people, 40 days earlier, said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will listen. And according to the Medrash, they were on the level of Malachim or higher than that level. On the level of angels. And 40 days later, they stand in front of a golden calf and they say, Elu Elohecha Yisrael. This is your God, Israel. And how we understand it. What happened? What change took place in those 40 days? And interestingly, as I always point out, we find that the leaders of the tribes, the Nesiim, who Moshe Rabbeinu sent out to spy on the land of Canaan, returned from Canaan and gave a negative report, which aroused the rebellion among the Jewish people against Moshe Rabbeinu and ultimately against the Jewish people and against God. And Jewish people, because of that, had to traverse the Midbar, the desert, for 40 years. And the generation that was involved in the sin were not able to enter the land of Israel. And who were these spies, these Nesiim, the prince of the tribes? Rashi B'nai Yisrael Hema. They were the leaders of the Jewish people. How are we to understand this? But the answer is when the Jewish people said Na'aseh v'nishma, and when the leaders of the tribes went to spy out on the land of Eretz Yisrael, as Rashi tells us, they were Anoshim Tzadikim. They were righteous at that point still. But 40 days later, they led a rebellion. Why? Because when the Jewish people said Na'aseh v'nishma, that was within the milieu of Moshe Rabbeinu being in their presence. When the prince of the tribes went out to Eretz Yisrael, to Eretz Canaan, to spy out on the land, they were leaving Moshe Rabbeinu. They were entering a different situation. So what did that demonstrate? That demonstrated the need for a Rebbe, the need for a teacher. The Torah Shebaal Peh today, Torah Shebaal Peh for the most part is written out. But for thousands of years, the Torah Shebaal Peh was given over orally. You weren't allowed to use a text publicly to study the oral tradition. It was the link of the generations, but the oral link of the generations. So the Egel Hazav, the golden calf, demonstrated the need of connecting the generations. If the Torah had all been written out, one could take the text and read it himself. But if it's an oral tradition that can't be written out, that can't be used in public study, it necessitates involvement with a teacher. So we have the written part of the Torah, and the written part of the Torah. The written part of the Torah is something that is seen, and we have the oral part of the Torah, that which is given over from generation to generation. And we could suggest, to a certain degree, that the empty spaces in the Torah, that represents the parts of the Torah that were not written out. It represents the oral tradition. And as the Torah goes to talk about the death of Yaakov, as Yaakov prepares his children for the future, when you take a look at the brachos, The Birchas Yaakov, more than being brachos, he is giving them guidance. He is telling them where they were strong and where they were weak. He was preparing them for the future. So there is an empty space that should have been there, but wasn't there. That means there was something that should have been given over, that would have been given over, but was not given over. That's about the Kates. That's about the future, when the Kates will be, when the redemption will be. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not want the Jewish people to know when the Kates will be. It could be that part of the reason for it is, as the Rambam says, that we have to be mitzapel biyoso. We have to look forward at every moment to Mashiach's coming. It doesn't mean that we have to believe that Mashiach necessarily will be here today or tomorrow. But we have to believe that Mashiach could be here today or tomorrow. When you look forward for someone's coming, you have to assume that he can come. We don't look forward for something that's going to happen 1,000 years from now or 300 years from now. We look forward for something that's happening in our lives. And Reb Chaim understood the idea of mitzapel biyoso, that we look forward to Mashiach coming at any time, at any moment. It's true. We've had a lot of disappointments. But nevertheless, if we are believing Jews, we have to believe that Mashiach can come at any moment. And I've mentioned many times what my uncle said, that the Rambam paskins that Mashiach, the Gula, will only happen when the Jewish people are Ein Yisrael Negolan El B'Tshuva. But our faith in the coming of Mashiach, our faith in the ultimate redemption, that the faith in the ultimate redemption is grounded in our faith in the Jewish people, that the Jewish people can do tshuva at every moment. And we see when the Jewish people, when we wonder, how is it possible? So many people are estranged from Torah. But that's part of our faith in the Jewish people. And I think that we have to bear this in mind, because this presents a challenge for us. It presents a real challenge for us, because today we see what's going on the college campuses. Where the people who are considered the intellectuals of our nation are justifying the murder and rape of the Jewish people. You have to remember, when there were pogroms in the towns of Europe, who did the pogroms? Who were the ones that went into the Jewish homes and killed and raped? Who was it? It was not the intellectual crowd. It was the common person. But who inspired them to do it? It were those that were knowledgeable. And there is a misunderstanding. We only have to worry about the college campuses, which is bad enough in itself. But you have to understand, it's these people on the college campuses who are trying to rig the world of morality, both in their own lives and the lives of our civilization. And they are the ones that the common people, the people who are not intellectually oriented, they are the ones that give over the attitudes to the others. Now, but right now, to a large degree, the problem is limited to the college campuses. Of course, we hear of incidents, isolated incidents, away from the college campuses, isolated incidents in shopping centers. But it is the Jewish collegiates, those who are on the college campuses who are Jewish, who to a large degree were estranged from the Jewish religion, who almost lost their Jewish identification. That now are beginning to realize what it means to be a Jew. They are scared to walk out of their dormitory rooms. They're scared to enter the libraries. Harvard University, at one time, was considered, probably not rightfully so, as the leaders of progressive thinking. But today, progressive thinking means something completely different than it meant then. It means mamish the opposite. The same words can mean two opposite thinking approaches. At that time, in the years ago, progressive thinking was to rise above hatred, senseless hatred, It was to denounce tyranny. Denounce those that go in and kill in a barbaric fashion. It was advanced thinking. And today, we see that not only morally, these places have become the abyss of morality and spirituality. They're trying to erase religion. And more than anything else, they're trying to erase the Jewish people. And the Jewish students on the college campuses who hardly knew that they were Jewish are beginning to understand that they are Jewish. And while we would have hoped that this wouldn't be, that this situation would not have been the way it is, but it does offer us an opportunity. Now that they understand what it means to be Jewish, now that they understand what anti-Semitism means, and now that they're ready to fight the anti-Semitism, because the anti-Semitism is an attack on them. It's an attack on their ability to be in school. That offers us the opportunity to go out and to be makar of them, to bring them close to the Jewish people, to understand that while you're not being accepted among your colleagues in school, you are part of us. So, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not give over. There was something missing in the oral Masorah, in the Masorah that wasn't written. We're told that the separate spaces between the paragraphs, that's Moshe Rabbeinu thinking over the Parsha. When Moshe Rabbeinu was thinking over the Parsha, that was the Torah Shebaal Peh. That was the oral tradition. And here, the oral tradition, in a sense, was removed from Yaakov in this one aspect. And part of it was in order for the Jewish people to be mitzapeh l'gula. And today we have this opportunity to bring people who are estranged from the religion, to bring them closer. And we shouldn't let that pass. Now, this is the explanation of Moshe Rabbeinu, of the Gula, of the redemption, not not being given over by Yaakov Avinu. However, the first answer was that the eyes and the hearts of the Jewish people were closed from the Tzaras HaShibud. I want to suggest that perhaps we could suggest a different explanation here in Rashi. And over a story, my grandfather, my mother's father, Moshe Shurin, he was the Rosh Yeshiva of a yeshiva in the town of Ritva, in Lithuania. It was sort of like a branch of Tel's yeshiva in Europe, probably more of a high school type yeshiva. And needless to mention, there was a lot of difficulty, Parnassa-wise, in the poor towns of Europe, in being a Rosh Yeshiva, especially of a small local yeshiva high school. And as a result, he felt forced to go to America. And he would send money to my grandmother. They didn't want to move the whole family at that point. There was an attitude that America was treif. You can't bring up children being loyal to Torah in America. So initially, he went to America, and first he was a rabbi in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he had other jobs. And he would send money to his family in Europe, to my grandmother, to support the family. And then after 5 years, he returned to Ritava, and he gave a speech in the shul. And in the speech in the shul, he said, when you see things from day to day, the difference between Sunday and Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday are very small. But when you were away for 5 years, you see the difference after a 5-year period. So you're more aware. So you, the Jews of Ritva, you, the Jews who lived here, you don't see the change that's taking place. Because today is not so much different than yesterday. And yesterday is not so much different than the day before that. But I was gone for 5 years. 5 years ago. And this was before World War II. 5 years ago, you were not afraid to walk in the streets at night. And now, 5 years later, it's considered a sakana, a danger to walk in the streets. He says you have to leave. It's time to leave. Of course, the Jews in Ritava, the Jews in Lithuania, the Jews in Europe probably did not have the political power that we, the Jews of America, have if we use it. So I think the Shibud itself, the enslavement itself, did not begin when Yaakov died. But the attitudes that led to the enslavement, and to a certain degree, that molded the psychological serval perspective that Jews in all countries have regarding the country that they live in. What is the problem? We want to see ourselves as Americans first and Jews last. And ultimately, we want to erase our Jewish identity, chas v'shalom. And that's what was happening on the college campuses. Except all of a sudden, it wasn't so day by day. It was almost overnight. Much worse than the situation in Egypt. In Egypt, Yosef still remained in his powerful position. But what happened? Yaakov. Vayechi Yaakov beretz Mitzrayim shva'as reishana. The Meshech Chochmah points out, why does it say Yaakov lived in Egypt 17 years? Why didn't it say Be'eretz Goshen, in the land of Goshen? Even though Yaakov lived in Egypt, in Goshen, he resided in Goshen. His house was in Goshen. His community was in Goshen. But his impact was felt all over Egypt. He was very well respected. You see how much Paro was looking forward to Yaakov's coming to Egypt. And when he died, to a certain degree, the respect for the Jewish people diminished. He was the elder. And I think the idea perhaps is the fact that there is no space there is a re-experiencing of what happened to the Jews in Europe. When my grandfather warned the Jews of Ritva. In other words, they were strong. They established houses. They thought they'd be citizens of Egypt. But ultimately, the regard that Egypt had for them died. And the difference, why? Because it was a little bit, initially, it was day by day. There was no space in between. It was a little bit each day. It was, and because it was each day a little bit, there was a denial of reality. There was a denial of reality. And didn't have to start with Paro. It could be it started with the common folks of Egypt. And because of that, the Jewish people remembered their good days in Egypt, their residency in Egypt, their important position in Egypt. Like They didn't detect the small differences that was there at the very beginning. So there was a denial of reality. They denied what they saw. Their eyes were closed to the changing situation. And because their eyes were closed to the changing situation, because they denied reality with their eyes, they didn't see what was happening. They didn't understand. Nistama einehem v'libam shel Yisrael, and their hearts. The word leiv could mean heart, feelings, and leiv also can mean the brain. My father once told me that Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal told him that the word leiv very often in Tanakh doesn't just have reference to the heart, but it has reference to the brain also. Their thinking, the way they thought was different. They thought in a manner that would deny reality because they didn't want to believe that there was a change in attitude. And even when they became fully enslaved, they attributed it to the fact that Paro disliked them. There was one person, Paro. But as soon as Paro will die, the people of Egypt, who they believe really loved them, because they were in denial of reality, so those people of Egypt will once again give them the high esteem that they had. And then the Torah tells us in Parsha Shemos, Vayomas Melech Mitzrayim, the king of Egypt died. Vayanchu v'nei Yisrael min avoda v'tal shavasum olikim. The Jewish people groaned from their labor, from their servitude, from their slavery. It seems up to that point, even though they recognized they were enslaved, but they felt, we just got to wait till Paro is dead. Well, that group of Paros are dead. And then the Egyptian people will restore us to our positions of glory because we want to see ourselves as Egyptians. We see ourselves as Egyptians, and because we want to see ourselves as Egyptians, we believe that the Egyptians want to see us as Egyptians. And we create our own reality. And to a large degree, that is what we're seeing today. It's starting maybe at the other end. It's starting on the college campuses. But these are the people that are going to become the leaders. And unless we make our power known, our political power known, we will be making the same mistake that the Jewish people in Egypt made. Yeah, we don't feel it outside the college campuses just yet. Believe me, if we didn't have news media that would report it on the televisions, it would be all the way in the back of our minds. It would be in the papers that we throw out. But today, what's happening everywhere is in our house. And we see it. It's not just a report. We see it as it's happening. And we have to understand that it changes from day to day. It gets worse unless we put a stop right now. And we have to let our politicians know. We can't believe that, oh, it's just the college campuses. Maybe today, primarily, it's the college campuses. Maybe today, it's primarily the shopping centers. But already, they're destroying Jewish stores. Not so many. The difference is that to a certain degree, we have a certain political power today. And of course, we have to intensify our Jewish identification. We can't become cowards. And there are those, we have to realize that we are Jews first. Because if we don't realize it, we're going to be reminded of it by others. This situation repeats itself from generation to generation. When God saves us. Yes, we have to daven for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's help. We have to learn Torah. All of that helps. But we have to use our political power as well. And we have to realize that we are Jews first. It's very interesting. I talked to some people and they say, Trump, first they would say, Trump, he's Hitler. The fact that I'm no big fan of his character. The fact that he has a son-in-law that's Jewish, the fact that he would attend his Shabbos meal, somehow I don't think that Hitler would have done that. And then people say, well, that to them it's more important to vote against Trump than the situations that are being permitted. Now, I'm not telling people who to vote for. But don't let politicians think that the Jewish issue is a secondary issue. Whichever candidate you vote for, make sure that not only he gives words of encouragement at the beginning, but they remain committed to the Jewish people throughout. Because if we don't remember that we are Jews first and Americans second, they will tell us that we are Jews first and we are not Americans. Little by little, it will spread from the college campus. When a president of Harvard could say it's okay to express about the annihilation of the Jewish people, depending on the context. So I ask you, who is closer to Hitler? Trump or the president of Harvard? Who is closer to Hitler? Those who support Trump or those who support the president of Harvard who says it depends on the context? Those whose minds are closed Those who can't think, who don't want to think, will say Trump is worse than that because they want to see themselves as Americans first and Jews second. And how many of our brethren were lost because of this type of thinking? There is no one day we're doing very well. The next day things are getting are bad. There's no space between the two events. It's one day to the next day. And we are in that next day. And if we don't take a stand, there'll be many more next days. And each day will be worse than the other. The Torah tells us at length about this, partially because Maisa Avo similar banim, because what happened over there has happened and can happen. And if we don't take a strong stand, will unfortunately happen. It's our responsibility to protect our children, protect ourselves, and to protect Klal Yisrael. Okay.
Someone's asking from what you said about 10 minutes ago. Are you saying that closing our eyes and hearts to that our eyes and hearts are closed to the changing situation here in America or the rest of the world? It's time to go to Eretz Yisrael. Is our physical moving more important for safety than our voting and Parnasa here? What's the boundary point?
Obviously, first of all, I believe, independent of this, if somebody has the ability to move to Eretz Yisrael, and if he's not necessary for the community here in America, and as I point out many times, you can go to Eretz Yisrael, you can, when you're in America, you can help the community in Eretz Yisrael. So every situation is different. Every person is different, and each person should discuss it with others, see what is in his interest. But what I'm saying is, it doesn't necessitate everybody going to Eretz Yisrael, although that would be, people going to Eretz Yisrael is a very good thing, it's a mitzvah, but it puts an obligation on us to do whatever we can, wherever we are, on behalf of the Jewish people. The need to, if the Jewish people at the very, very beginning had taken a strong position, there probably would be some communities alive in Europe today. I don't know. I'm not that well versed in history, but I see the situation in America today. We're not at that point where we have to flee, but we can fight where we are. And I don't think that many of the Jewish people in Europe initially recognized the need to fight. What we have to recognize is our need to fight. We can fight politically, we can fight militarily, we can go to Israel, join the army, but we have to fight. We can't stand still and say, oh, America will never do it. It will never happen in America.
What do you say about the Beis Halevi? If there wouldn't have been the Egel, then we would have known that the Torah Shabbat Peh been part of the Torah Shabbat Ksav?
It would have been part of the Torah Shabbat Ksav, yes.
So Ayin Tachas Ayin would still have meant Mammon.
It would have meant Mammon, yes.
Okay, there aren't any other questions here. So everyone have a good week, and we should hear Besoros Tovos.